Welcome to the Evergreen RX, your prescription for living well. Here, we're all about self-exploration, intentionality, and working with our mind, body, and soul for healing and growth. I'm your host, Hayden. I'm in my 20s and in search of connection, fulfillment, and ways to make sense of the world. If you're down, join me as I explore tools to bridge the gap between external reality and our deep inner worlds, discovering our own prescriptions for health, wholeness, and expansion. Hello, welcome back. Episode 11. This is the season finale, guys. Season 1. I wanted it to be 11 episodes, and I cannot believe that we're already here. I feel like I've grown so much and gotten so much more comfortable over these first 11 episodes, and with every step, I just get more excited and energized for all of the future seasons to come. It feels right, and I'm so excited to continue building the Evergreen RX community. So yeah, like I said, I have plans for the future and probably will be sprinkling in a couple of bonus episodes between now and season 2, which I expect to be probably in the new year, which is great timing. I feel like the new year is like the Super Bowl for like wellness people in the wellness space, but be sure to follow so that you can stay tuned and see the bonus content that I also put out. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently on how I've always wanted the Evergreen RX to be something different and not just add more noise to the millions of wellness influencers and people out there. I've always wanted it to be something super authentic to me, and that's a continual process and a continual redefining, and that authenticity piece there is so key. If you've seen the title, then you know that's kind of what I'm here to talk about today, and it feels so fitting considering that I knew a big part of going into this personal project of mine, starting a podcast, was going to require a lot of authenticity from me and vulnerability, and I was right. But I feel like I've learned things along the way, and it's feeling like I'm compelled to talk about it with all of you guys now. So I'm going to start off with just like a little bit of personal background on what has been on my mind, what's been flowing for me recently in terms of authenticity and vulnerability. And then I want to talk more about just those two words or feelings, almost like the feeling and the process of being authentic and vulnerable and how we show up. I'll talk about that on more of like a general level. And then I also want to throw out some tips, I guess, on what I have been doing to try to help with cultivating more authenticity and vulnerability in my life. That has been helping, and so maybe it'll help you. And I called it the trouble of authenticity because that came to me when I was journaling about this podcast, actually. I was feeling a lot of things, but in particular with the podcast, I was just feeling overwhelmed with how to make it true to me, and also how much that had taken of me so far in the process. You know, starting with episode 1, I was so exhausted after recording because I just felt like I was putting on a performance. And I can't say that's totally gone away or feels perfect, but it's definitely improved. And it has not improved through, osmosis and time and a gentle, lowering down onto, this new cultivated skill. I feel like for me it was, it was a hard in my face process these last couple of months of having a lot of self-doubt and frustration and general brain chatter going on. The ego mind, that kind of critical thinking was loud, especially at the beginning, of like, what am I even saying? Who the hell would want to listen to this? Who am I to share on a platform the things that I know and the things that I've been through? And like, will this ever amount to anything. And honestly, in my heart, I don't think I'm trying to do it, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want, to generate a community and have people listen and have people hopefully get something out of it, or else I would just not be making this podcast. And so a lot of brain chatter came up for me and has been the biggest behind the scenes theme of this journey so far. And I feel like it matters to talk about, not just because it's something I've personally been going through, but because I think it's like a larger kind of collective experience. In the past few years, we have people like Brene Brown who have, amped up the conversation on things like vulnerability, but it's still such an elusive yet widely shared struggle, I feel like, with learning, especially in your 20s, who the hell you even are, much less how to let people see that, how to represent it, and in a time when representation of yourself can be on such a large scale. I have struggled a lot with perception in the past year, especially with the podcast on how am I being perceived? What am I putting out into the world? Is it something that I'm proud of, that I want to put out into the world? And what does it mean when it's out there and I don't get to control it anymore? I record these episodes in my house and I edit them, and it's all just to me. I'm alone when I record, and I get it in my safe little bubble. And then I post it online, and anyone can see it, and anyone can think anything they want about me, about who it is that showed up, just on their couch recording. Like, that is such a vulnerable, safe, sensitive place that I'm coming from, and throwing it out into this world that is so not safe and not small and not always the most forgiving. And for me, it's like, it's not even so much of like concerned about getting hate or criticism. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, so I'll let you guys know if that happens and how I feel about it. But that's not the primary fear. The primary fear has been, if I put myself out there, everyone that comes into contact with it will hold a mirror up to me, and I'm afraid of what I'm going to see, because that defines who I am and who I'm not. And I'm using defines there, and it's not like I think that how other people view me defines me. I'm actually working on that. But I mean that we will see a reflection back to us. And if you take a bunch of reflections and you kind of make an amalgamation, you can get a general idea of how you're perceived by the world. And that just means that there's certain things that I'm not. And it's like I said in a podcast a while back that I'm like, I feel like I'm like a purple, and some people are reds, and some people are orange, and you embrace your unique color and shade, and all of that is great, but it's also hard because that means you're not red, or you're not orange, or you're not, at least right now. And I do think there is an essence to all of us that doesn't really change over the lifespan. And there was something, for me in doing this process that made it so like visceral, which is, what do I think my essence is, and how does that come across to other people? So I'm getting super, super philosophical, but I'm letting it flow. So hopefully you're tracking. But I felt like in that sense, that fear of what was going to be reflected in how people would respond to me also became this driving force behind, as soon as I would hit record, it was like I was doing a performance of myself. A performance, because then at least if I'm putting on who I am instead of being who I am, then maybe it's not as vulnerable. at least it doesn't feel as vulnerable, but it also feels way more exhausting. And hopefully you're connecting with this feeling in yourself if you have experienced it, and this clicks in on what I'm talking about of, when I perform, even if it's a mask that is trying to be authentic to who I am, I'm not trying to lie, I don't try to put something on that I'm not, but it still is this masked version, then somehow I can keep bits of myself safe and bits of myself hidden. These have all been thoughts swirling around in my head in the past year, and I don't know if it's just the age I am now or what's going on, but my guess is some of you are relating to and know what I'm talking about here. But the real gag of authenticity is that when you are true to your core, when you do show up in the world from that place, that means that you are perceived, you are seen, and you are interpreted, and you are transmuted, and you are changed in other people's minds from their perspective. That doesn't change who you are and the essence of who you are. But, God, sometimes it can feel like it, can't it? Or the threat just feels so big. And that causes me to withdraw. It's like pull back. I think that there's kind of two ways that we can withdraw. And one is just close it off and kind of fight against how other people are viewing you or interacting with you, or to morph and to mold into what you think they want or who they are and how you can match that. What I'm talking about here, and what I'm talking about when I get to some tips on how to deal with this, is that we have to learn to be okay. I had to learn to be okay not controlling the narrative of my life, because that's not possible, really. And it's really exhausting. And I'll tell you, hitting record on episode 11 versus episode 1, when I've done all of this work to learn how to be genuinely, purely, open-heartedly authentic, it's a lot easier. And I'm not perfect. I am not there yet. I can guarantee you that. And it really depends on what I'm talking about. How authentic I feel like I can be. But steps have been made. Improvements have been made. And I'm starting to be more okay with having that mirror held up to me. So when it comes to authenticity and vulnerability on the larger scale, and also the reason I'm kind of coupling those two is I think that they're really hard to disconnect. I think authenticity is just completely interwoven with vulnerability and vice versa. So the trouble with authenticity, as I see it, first and foremost, is that it requires you to stake a claim on some ground and call it your own. To say, I know me, this is me, this is how I show up, this is how I am in relationships, these are my values, this is my essence, this is my integrity, and I am acting and speaking and moving through the world in this way. And you stick that claim. And I think before our 20s, there's not so much of a requirement to do that. The world's kind of your oyster. At least that's what people say. It's like, you're in school, you're exploring, you're constantly learning, you're figuring out maybe what you want your career to be, but you're exploring all of the options. You are developing your brain. I mean, even in your 20s, your brain isn't developed, but you're rapidly developing when you're in your teens and prior to that point. You get to try on different hats. And you can do that the rest of your life. And I think all of us do. But there is an energy to the 20s, which is like, okay, you've tried on some different looks. What's yours? What direction are you going to move in? What are you going to say yes to? And thus, what are you going to say no to? And that's such a big part about being able to show up in an authentic way. And it's a big ask. It's like a big request. And then vulnerability intertwined with that has a whole other big ask. Vulnerability asks you to show up for what's happening. It asks you to share and to connect in an unsanitized, real, unprocessed way with the people that you love or that you're close to or you're wanting to be closer to. You know, one of the things with this podcast is I'm being authentic and vulnerable, and I'm not going to show up with something completely unprocessed. If I just went through a breakup, like, I'm not going to process my breakup through the podcast. But there are ways to talk about it, to talk about what's going on in my life that still have that essence of vulnerability, not just bringing the most whitewashed, cliched, clean version to put out into the world because that's what feels safest, but bringing some of the pieces that feel a little scarier, a little like spikier, and showing up in my relationships or on this platform in that way. That's what vulnerability asks of us. And with the people we are close to and we're safe with and we love, it asks, show up messy and show up in the midst of what you're going through. It asks us to be open-hearted and to allow for diversity and inconsistency in ourselves and in others. The more we can tolerate the inconsistency of who we are and how we change and how, showing up in an authentic way means showing up in a complex way, the more we're able to accept that and welcome it in others. That's a personal struggle I've had, really coming from a place of learning to tolerate my fluctuating ways of being and my ever-changing and growing lifestyle, especially as someone who is very grounded and stable and on the whole pretty consistent. That was super uncomfortable. It was like, oh my God, wait. I don't want to change my mind. I don't want to seem back and forth. I don't want to seem flaky. What if I'm this today and I'm that tomorrow? And so I would just keep it to myself. Because if I don't share with people, then I don't really have to go back on anything. I'll share once it's like we're at that point. Like, once it's fully integrated, then I'll share. But that meant that I couldn't tolerate in others. And I wasn't judgmental, but it was really just like a confusion and discomfort with the fact that others were also inconsistent and ever-changing. And here's the thing. Here's one of the bottom lines that I feel like a lot of you will relate to and I relate to is that, wanting to show up to be liked versus wanting to be authentic carries very different energy. Your intention of being who you are will attract to you the people that like you and love you and accept you for all of that. Putting on a mask, putting on a performance of your authentic self to keep yourself safe will not get you closer to those authentic relationships. And even if those people are in your life, it creates some level of energetic boundary between you and them. And I'm so passionate on the fact that our relationships and the people that we share our time with during our life is one of the best parts and the most beautiful parts about being alive. That's why, for me in this past year, it's gotten so vital to learn and to practice and to push myself to be more authentic and to find the people that love that and accept it and open their arms wholeheartedly to me. So, all right, here's what I've been trying. Like I said, this is I'm coming unprocessed, guys. I'm coming mid-process. I'm working on this. If I had made a podcast about it 3 months ago, I would not have as much to say because I wouldn't have had as much time to think about it, but I'm still mid-process on like what is helping and how do we grow in this area And how does it feel to do that and to think about authenticity and vulnerability in that way? So I'm bringing it to you guys with what I've learned through my own therapy, through my own reading, and my own life experience, which is probably the most valuable of all. So here's the first one. It's a doozy. It's, the thing that we all kind of roll our eyes when we hear. Self-kindness, guys. Self-compassion. Changing that inner voice. Working with it to create new phrases, new ways of talking to you, new neural pathways. So much of what I've been learning recently with healing is that we do some deep healing, we do some growth and some, inner child work or like really clearing some wounds. And then the rest of it is practicing our new way of being and our new way of showing up and talking to ourselves. It's true. It works. So really practicing self-kindness, positive self-talk, self-affirmation. If you need before you go hang out with someone to like repeat something to yourself, like I will show up for myself, I will express my authentic self is valuable, I am loved, I am wanted exactly as I am. Repeating those. If there's a moment of expansion or growth, or you try to be more open or more vulnerable, and then there's this, feeling of fear, the ego is like, why'd you do that? You're so stupid. Like, you look so embarrassing, and they're judging you. Practicing your self-talk in that way, of the cliche thing of how would you talk to a best friend, but hey, whatever, we all kind of know what that would sound like, so it's a good reminder. Another part of it is what I just was saying, which is when your ego flares up, that has been a big clue to me recently that I'm expanding and I'm growing, because I'll do something new, I'll share, I will put myself out there. And my ego, that thinking, that critical mind, oh my God, she will not shut up. That is when my ego goes to town on me. Like, it is crazy how just one little bit of expansion even can get my mind going off on why I shouldn't have done something or why it's not going to work out. And like I've talked about before, some of that stuff, it's awesome to go to therapy and to heal it and to talk through and process it with someone, because that can really help. But also just knowing when that ego does flare up, that might be a sign that you're growing, that you're trying something new. And that's not a bad thing. It's also been helpful for me to start small, something that feels almost inconsequential. A good example, even though maybe it's a little bigger than just inconsequential, is that I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. I've loved her my whole life. I listen to every album. Like, I'm a fan. I've gone to the concert. I've gone to the tour movie. I am a fan. And for whatever reason, which we don't have time to get into in this podcast episode, that's become kind of a controversial stance, and I have gotten some really negative reactions from people. So I learned to hide that part of myself. Oh, I just won't mention that I listen to Taylor Swift. People ask me my, music I listen to. 90% of the time, it is Taylor Swift, but I'm not going to say that because they might judge me, and they might not like me, and that doesn't feel good. That is an example of something that, even currently I'm working on with friendships and new people I've brought into my life, is like sharing, hey, I like Taylor Swift, even if I know that they don't, especially, that's a really good test, but just sharing that, throwing that out there, I say that as an example because it's like, it is important to me and it feels vulnerable to share it, but it's like, it's not gonna ruin my life if someone has a bad reaction or like has a different opinion. I'll survive. So it's a good place to kind of start, be uncomfortable, see how it goes, and then, take a step back and go back out. And next time, try something even a little more vulnerable and kind of titrate between these places of stepping out of your comfort zone, being vulnerable, saying something authentic to you, and then going back and taking care of yourself, being kind to yourself, and feeling safe again. Sometimes when I do something new, maybe introduce myself to someone at a coffee shop or whatever, sometimes I'll notice that ego flare up, and that's, it's kind of hard, and it can be draining to deal with that. And so then I'm like, okay, I did something new. Go me. I expanded. I tried to put myself out there. I had this ego flare up, so that means I'm really trying something new. And it's my sign to go home and to put on my coziest pajamas and a movie that I love and take care of myself and be kind to myself and kind of return to that home base of safety. And it's such a beautiful way, too, to nurture your relationship with yourself on like, okay, now I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to get to know you and what you like and build that authenticity within yourself on being able to like learn who you are and what feels true to you. So like that, you can build up over time. If somebody has a different political opinion and you feel like it's really important for you to share your difference, or, there's like a scale. And I would like to point out here that I am practicing this skill currently by sharing my love for Taylor Swift on this podcast. So who knows? Maybe when this goes live, I'll have a little bit of fear around having put myself out there in that way, and I'll have to take care of myself. Last bit here is to notice disconnection points for you. Like, where is the place that you maybe withdraw? What happens? What is the response from someone else, or a perceived facial expression? And kind of how do you deal with that? Do you push against? Do you shut them out? Do you shut yourself out? Do you mold to what they want? Like I was saying, that's a big thing that I do I did, with new people. Is like, I will mold myself to whatever they're doing. Like when you go out to dinner and you're kind of like trying to gauge, like, are they going to order food or just get a drink? Like, what should I do? Come on. I'm 24 years old. If I want a drink, if I want food, I got it. And that's a silly example, but like it does boil down to things that small, and it goes all the way up to the top too. Being authentic, it runs the gamut. But that is an example of like molding, kind of like, woo, because if I just match them, then they'll have to like me, or then they won't actually have to see me, and then I'm safer somehow. Well, here's the news. You're not safer that way, and it's exhausting. So noticing those points of disconnection for you and kind of what your response is in that way. Sometimes when we feel rejected or like maybe we shared too much, sometimes the reaction can be to like kind of shut that person out, to distance. So starting to identify for yourself and maybe some of your limiting beliefs around what connection and authenticity and vulnerability can look like. And as I say, as it always goes back to, it's my second mention, okay, so drink every time I talk about therapy, but it's also a good thing to bring to a therapist or, just a trusted person that you can process with. If there is someone you feel safe enough being authentic with to, to move through some of this stuff and process it. Journal is also helpful, but I also know that for me, my journal can kind of become another extension of keeping myself guarded because it's such a solo activity and it's just all, my private information in my own little world. And to truly practice authenticity, we have to bring it out into the world. So, we're at the dose. Here it is. Authenticity asks you to state your claim of who you are, and vulnerability asks you to show up unprocessed or mid-processed and nuanced. It takes self-kindness and practice and healing the blocks you bump up against. But life without authenticity and vulnerability is 2D. So you deserve it, and we can work on it together and keep growing. I know for me, one of the biggest things with starting the Evergreen RX is that to share to share my life, to share my thoughts, to share my experience, was to trust that I'm not alone in it. And I think taking that leap, trusting you're not alone, connecting with people in your real, genuine, open-hearted way leads to some of the most beautiful experiences. And I'm grateful that I've done it, that I'm doing it, that I'll continue to do it, and to take care of myself through all the ups and downs. So lastly, to cap off a great season 1, I pulled a tarot card for all of us on this authentic and vulnerable journey. And it couldn't have been more beautiful. I pulled the 6 of Cups, and this card symbolizes showing up. And this card, legitimately, I'm not, just yanking your chain. I didn't pull it out of the deck on purpose. It legitimately symbolizes showing up in your vulnerability and with your open heart, because that contributes to fulfillment and joy and connection, and you deserve it. Take that with you if you want. I'm rooting for you, and until next season, but really sooner with bonus episodes, I wish you all the best. Take care of yourself, connect with me in the interim, and be sure to follow to stay in the loop. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I can't wait for more. Bye.